Hey friends, I want to thank you for watching and sharing the first half of my interview with Alasdair Macleod. Here's the second half of the interview, Swiss Gold and Breaking the Cartel. Thanks for listening.
Against all of these hot headlines, we have the Swiss gold referendum vote coming up on November 30th, and that potentially is another seismic shift where the Swiss National Bank would have to back up its assets with 20% physical gold reserve, and Rick Santelli predicts it will pass. What do you make of the Swiss referendum? How important is it, and do you think it will pass?
Well, I find it a fascinating one. I mean, I am surprised that I'm delightfully surprised, by the way, that the referendum shows something. Was it 45 to 32 or something? I can't. 45 to 39, I think it was. 45% polled in favour of saying yes, and 39 against. So there is a sort of lead, which I think it's rather like so many of these referenda. People basically think, well, we can give the authorities a kicking, but then when it actually comes closer to it, people begin to think a bit more seriously, and they probably don't go with it.
But let me interject. You mentioned the recent poll, and I just want to interject. I was Googling as you said that just to see what the latest news is, and I get a kick out of this. This is from the Rothschild Reuters news agency. Swiss gold referendum's support falls short of majority poll, according to a poll. But of course what they're not saying there is the numbers you just cited, right? So what they're trying to do is spin this and say, well, the majority. Well, in fact, the majority, 100% of the people won't show up to vote. The vote never adds up to 100% of the people. But what Reuters is trying to do is spin the news. They're trying to spin the news and say that it falls short of the majority. Well, in fact, it looks like it may pass.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think you're right. The poll actually was slightly more nuanced than we're talking, which is interesting because they split it into, are you definitely going to vote yes, or are you likely to vote yes? In other words, are you absolutely certain, or are you sort of not definitely certain? And what was interesting is that there was a greater degree of certainty on the in favour of the referendum vote as opposed to against. And that I found interesting. So it is going to be an interesting one. And what might well happen is that as the Swiss National Bank continues to produce the most trite arguments why they should continue to have this freedom. I mean, when I saw it, I thought this is really, this is ridiculous. I think they could well put people off voting against the referendum. And on that basis, I think there's a good chance that it might just get through.
Well, fellas, we're about 40 minutes into this conversation. I have one more question for Alasdair. Rory, I'm sure you have at least one. Do you want to jump in before we lose Alasdair?
Well, I'd like to comment on the Swiss gold referendum initiative. And I recently spoke with Claudio Grass, and he made it quite clear. He's a Swiss citizen. And he made it quite clear that the people with direct democracy being in Switzerland that don't count the people short. So he is of the mindset that it is going to pass. There's not much question in his mind that it's going to pass. He had been talking to people on the street, just ordinary people, about it. And all of the people that he was speaking with were either unsure to the positive or positive yes. And with him being in the precious metals community, all of the people within Switzerland that he had spoken with were all voting yes, obviously. And it was pretty powerful what he was saying. And I tend to lean that way. I think that it is going to pass, and I think that the article that you just cited, Sean, coming from Reuters, at this early stage, and already painting this bleak picture, they're already the shills are already out because they know that direct democracy, as Gerald Celente talks about all the time, that is the only true way of getting a a real picture of what the people want. Let the people vote is what he says.
Well,
Sorry,
let me just say one thing before I forget. No, you're right, and but let's put this in perspective, guys, based on our conversation so far today. If we're talking about 10,000 tons of gold having been acquired by China just since 2011, with possibly 30,000 tons or more in reserve, right, that they haven't made publicly known. What we're talking about with this Swiss gold referendum is 1,500 tons of gold to be purchased over the next 5 years. I think what's more important about the Swiss gold referendum is that it's very symbolic. It's symbolic of really, you're right, Rory, the last standing democracy on the face of the planet, a direct democracy of the people standing up for their rights and their sovereign nation. And they realize that they don't want to be part of this Western Ponzi scheme. They realize that the future will be backing their currency in gold. I think so symbolically, it's far more important than the 1,500 tons of gold that we'll be talking about, because clearly the power has already moved to China and Russia and the BRICS. So this is just very symbolic, and I think that that's what has Reuters, that's what has the Rothschilds, that's what would have the Western bankers concerned, is how highly symbolic this is in terms of liberty.
Can I just add something, Sean?
Please.
I think what's interesting in this is if this gets passed, then I think on the one hand, you'll find that the Swiss National Bank will try and wriggle out of it somehow. So don't take it as a done deal. It's my first point.
Right.
But the second point I think is probably more positive for gold. And I think that if this one passes, I think it's likely to get political agitation in other European countries.
That's right.
Within the Eurozone. For the central banks to be more clear about the position on their gold, and also to stop them selling any gold, and also to lean on them to stop them leasing gold. So I think the ramifications, I think it could turn out that what's happening in Switzerland is the start of something really quite important in the European context.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think what's crazy about the world in which we live right now, and I wanted to ask you this before we lose you, is that we do see Western economies not only failing, but imploding. And I wanted to ask you before we lose you, do you agree with our friend Andy Hoffman that Japan will be the first world Western nation to hyperinflate, to experience hyperinflation? What we're seeing in Japan is very alarming.
Well, logically, that is likely to be true. But the problem, I think, with calling, who's going to sort of crack first, is that all these currencies depend entirely on confidence in them for their value. And I think it's more likely that the problem will arise in an internationally held currency rather than just a purely domestically held currency, because that is essentially the situation in Japan. Japan creates its own buyers in the sense that, people will go in and buy yen to, they will borrow yen, if you like, to go and buy something else. It's the cheapest form of financing any asset acquisition. So you've got the yen carry trade, which has sort of helped keep it up. You've got virtually no foreign involvement in the bond market there because the yields are just too low. So they do have a fair degree of control over the currency. Though, having said that, the currency has actually fallen by, 30-40% or something over the last 2 years. I mean, it's gone from under 80 to the dollar. We briefly got up to 109 in recent weeks. So that's quite a slide in the currency. I think the euro is also very vulnerable because the various components in the Eurozone are basically all in trouble one way or the other. It's particularly noticeable with France, but this is not reflected in the bond yield. I mean, the French 10-year bond yield is around about 1.25%. I mean, this is just lunacy. Mm-hmm. The German bond yield is very low. I think the 10-year is standing at something like 0.75%. But then that is the safe haven, if you like, within the Eurozone. I mean, Greece is only, what, 7%, having been down to about 6.5%. I mean, would you lend money for 10 years to Greece on that basis? Or would you lend it to Italy at less than 2.5% for 10 years?
No.
I certainly wouldn't.
No.
I mean, these
I'd
markets are
rather buy
horrendously
gold.
rigged.
I'd rather buy a barbarous relic and put it in a safe and forget about it.
Well, exactly, and but I mean, coming back to your question, I don't think we can predict which currency is going to collapse first. We can say which should, but which actually is going to, I don't know. And the dollar itself has got huge, great problems.
Right.
And we haven't even talked about that.
Right.
But that could take us another hour.
No, you're right. And we do need to go here. And I'll just summarize by saying the demographics in Japan are pretty horrifying, though. I think that Andy Hoffman may be right about the yen. But as you note, it's a race to the bottom with all of these currencies. Hey, Rory, I want to ask you a question first, and then I would love to have Alasdair comment on this. We haven't talked about silver yet, and I would be remiss not to mention the Future Money Trends interview with First Majestic CEO Keith Neumeyer, who suggested, and I think courageously so, and of course this is common sense, but it takes guts for a CEO to say this. He suggested that silver mining companies should form an OPEC-like cartel and at least for one day symbolically in 2015 withhold all physical silver sales to help end the paper silver manipulation. In his words, we all know there's no relation between the paper silver market and the physical market. Rory, what'd you make of that interview?
I applauded. I literally stood up out of my chair here in the house and applauded when after I listened to that. I know it sounds silly, but it's probably one of the most courageous acts that I've seen and heard from a CEO of a large company in a very long time. And I think that it echoes what Eric Sprott had done a couple of years ago with sending out an open letter to the CEOs, and he got almost no response from that. And I'm really hoping that Mr. Neumeyer is able to rally the troops. And I believe it's a month. I don't think it's a day. I think he's calling for a 30-day period during 2015 to stop all sales, to just not sell anything at all, and just bank it.
You might be right. I may have misspoke. You might be right about that. And I will say that at least he puts his money where his mouth is, because I think they withheld 30% of their silver production maybe in 2014. I'll have to revisit those numbers. But he doesn't want to sell silver at these prices.
Well, he's not. He's at break even. I mean, in that interview, he said that his all-in cost were around $15, I believe, but they were going to drop over the next few months because of some things, and it was going to be down around $12 or $13 an ounce. But even still, what kind of profit is that? $2 an ounce? That's nothing. That's not any profit.
Well, I was thinking about that after the interview too, and you know what popped into my head? What business is there that is an economically viable business in the world at large? You can name any business you want. Maybe the business with the lowest margins is the grocery business, the restaurant business, but any other business is looking for keystone markup on what they produce. Look at Apple iPhones. What if Apple was forced through the paper iPhone cartel to sell their iPhones at just a couple dollars over the cost of production? No, they make the things for what? $14, $15, $20 and sell them for hundreds of dollars. That is called capitalism, right? You're providing a product that has worth and value, and you're being paid for it. These silver mining companies are not being compensated for the labor and the investment it takes to mine silver out of the ground. Alasdair, what was your thought on that interview?
I applaud the sentiment, but I think we have to stand back and be a bit realistic about it. The supply of silver, I think there are two weaknesses in his argument. One is that the large mining companies have silver as a byproduct. So actually what drives the quantity they produce is not the price of silver per se, but at the price of copper or nickel in the main. I think that's one end of it. The other end of it is that there is a lot of silver which comes from smaller producers. And these smaller producers literally, with the way the prices are, need money for their silver doré as quickly as possible so they can pay their bills. I mean, they've got a cash flow problem.
Right.
And this, of course, plays into the bank's hands.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it works is very, very simple. And I worked this out because I've talked to a lot of these miners. It's rather like the man from Del Monte in the advert, but it's not Del Monte. It's the man from Glencore or Trafigura turns up, and he will assay your doré, and he'll say, well, it looks like it's about 80%, and there's about 2% gold in it, and this is the figure I'll give you. And the money comes from JP Morgan, who, of course, works with Trafigura and Glencore. That way, JP Morgan they know they've got the silver to sell at a stage forward. So that effectively, they're providing this money against a forward delivery of silver. It's then shipped off to somewhere like China, where it's refined for as little as possible, and then it's supplied into the market. And that's the way it works. The problem is that, if you're a silver miner and you're dependent on the cash flow, you cannot say no to the man from Trafigura.
Right.
And that's the reality of it.
Right.
So, basically, the way the financial system works, they've got you.
Yeah, they've got us, but they don't have us permanently, because everything that we've talked about in this interview stacks up to the documentation of the collapse. And the Western banking system and its paper fiat Ponzi is in collapse mode. We know it. And actually, guys, this was perfect to end on this, because we've come full circle. And I want to go back to that Zero Hedge article, and I want to quote, "Recall from around the time when the first Deutsche Bank banker hung himself. It was Elke Koning, the president of Germany's top financial regulator, BaFin, who said that in addition to currency rates, manipulation of precious metals is, quote, worse than the LIBOR rigging scandal, end quote. It remains to be seen if this latest suicide, Calagaro's death, was also related to precious metals rigging, although it certainly would not be surprising." I want everybody to realize that as China and Russia and the BRICS acquire tons and tons and tons of gold, and as the Swiss vote to reback their own currency with gold, silver is tied to gold as a valuable, manipulated precious metal. So my hat's off, too, to Neumeyer for bringing up his idea. Certainly, I think there's other silver mining CEOs who are equally concerned and tired of this paper manipulation. But as was also noted in that interview, the last time there was a bear market as terrible as this one in silver, with the mining companies, it lasted about 4 years, and we're about 3.5 years deep into this one. He predicts we're at a bottom. I think he's right. Fellas, we've given about an hour to bat these important topics around, and Alasdair, as always, I can't thank you enough for your time. You're a generous guest.
No, it's very much my pleasure. I enjoy talking with you.
Well, we sure enjoy talking with you, too. Rory, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Since you became a contributor to SGT Report, you started your own website that I want to call attention to. Can you tell people about it?
Thank you very much. It's thedailycoin.org, and we cover, primarily I'm covering economics, gold and silver, and preparedness.
Great. And Alasdair, please remind people how to find your good work on your websites.
Well, the two websites, one is GoldMoney, goldmoney.com, where I'm head of research, and I have my own website, which is financeandeconomics.org, O-R-G.
Well, very good, guys. Check out financeandeconomics.org and Gold Money, and also check out Rory's Daily Coin if you get the chance. And we do appreciate you spending some time with us over at SGT Report, where we have a very vibrant comment section and some really great people that leave comments. Angel, I just want to shout out Angel. I really like Angel and her spirit. She's a sweetheart. And everybody, there's some really great regulars there. I want you all to know how much we appreciate you and your contributions, like Jeff. I read Jeff's comment today about the CIA assassination program. I want to thank everybody for listening and tuning in to this interview and for sharing it with others. I hope you all have a wonderful week ahead. Bunker down. This is the collapse, and we are documenting it. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.